Harvest Church Sunday School. I'm Martin Houston. Glad you've chosen to be with us live and on the live stream. So we'll keep our journey through Exodus going. We're in Exodus 21. We had a really good week last week. If you missed it, you can always go back and watch it on the live stream. We'll continue to move forward. These, of course, are laws that God gave Moses to give to the people of Israel. The first 10 he gave to Moses, but to the people of Israel as well. But this time he's speaking directly to Moses. So, and then Moses is delivering it to the people. So we'll pick back up around verse 5. Where it's talking about if the servant declares, I love my master and my wife and children and do not want to go free, then his master must take him before the judges, which are the judges were the elders or the court system during that time. It was elders from the tribes of Israel, so it wasn't like our judges today per se. It was their system of dealing with grievances or wrongs or whatever, but it was members of the Jewish community that had been selected to be the elders of that community. He shall take him to the door or the doorpost and pierce his ear with an awl, then he will be his servant for life. We'll start right there. This was a scenario where a man that came into servanthood or indentured servanthood to this particular master as a single man. While there, he had been given a wife and had taken a wife and that had children. And the custom was if a man came free by himself, he left free by himself. After his 6 years of service, his debt was paid, he was released. 7th year, he could go free. But if he came single, he had to leave by himself. If he came with a wife and kids, he left with a wife and kids. In this scenario, he came single. He had been given a wife. And, of course, if you go back and read the scriptures, it says that the wife and the children were to stay with the master and that he could go free, or he had a choice. If he chose to stay with the master, then he could become a bondservant, but he became a bondservant for life. This was a life commitment. To get his bride and his inheritance, his children, he made a commitment for life. And they take him to the doorpost, and it was an awl, which is a tool that has a wooden handle with a point on it. Put it to his ear, and symbolically pinned his ear to pierce his ear to the door, and he was that bondservant for life. Paul calls himself a bondservant of Christ. Technically, that's really what we do when we get born again, if we do it the right way. When we come to Christ as believers, technically, what do we own? Now, what does the world tell us we own? The world tells us we own everything we earn, right? The world says we own our house, our cars, that our wife belongs to us, our children belongs to us. But what does God tell us? Everything belongs to him, right? So when we hear this in this texture in human nature, we go, ooh, oh man, that's rough. But that master in this case was responsible for who? He was responsible for that wife and those children. And if that man left, then he didn't take care of them, they came back to him anyway. So that man could stay, and that's the relationship we have with Christ. We become a bondservant to Christ if we do it correctly. The problem is we have a lot of people who want God to uphold his end of the deal, meaning that he'll never leave us nor forsake us, and that that he doesn't lose us, or our salvation is secure. But we're not so committed. We're not always the same on our side. And here, the master was responsible, but the servant made a what? He made a choice. He made a commitment that he would rather be with his master in all that the master had given him versus to have all the freedom that the world offers. What would happen if the church really got that message? What if we really, really, really got, I'd rather be with my master Jesus and what he gives me than to be free to pursue everything the world has to offer? Yeah, that's what God intended. So that's what that means there. Now, and then I know I've been on this for a while, but I really want us to fully grasp it and understand. If a man sells his daughter as a servant, she is not to go free as male servants do. And a lot of times we read that, and when you finish reading all this, if she does not please the master who has selected her for himself. What does that mean? This daughter wasn't being sold as a field servant or whatever. She was his wife. He was selecting her as his wife. So that's what it says. If she does not please the master who has selected her. Now they had something, and we'll get to it in I think it's the next chapter. It may be the end of this chapter. Next chapter, 22, where it's called a dowry. Anybody ever heard of that? It was a payment that was made by the father of the daughter to the groom, to that family, right? But that father could reject it or whatever. So this wasn't like we see it today. This was a mutual selecting there. That's why it was such strict requirements. It says, if he doesn't, he must let her be redeemed or purchased back. In other words, they could do the dowry, reverse it, right? So, and he has no right. He does not have a right to sell her to foreigners. So he can't so that tells you that she's not his property, because he can't do what he wants to with her. There are guidelines around it, because he has broken faith with her. If he selects her, first one was if he selects her for what? Himself. Or verse 9, if he selects him for his son. Same thought process, right? One was to be his wife. He was selecting for his wife, and he's to marry her and treat her and be faithful to her and all of that. If he selects for his son, he must grant her the rights as a daughter. It must be a full-fledged, this is my daughter now, and she gets all the rights in the way he would treat her as a daughter. If that son marries another woman, he must not deprive the first one of her food, clothing, or marital rights. If he does not provide her with these three things, she is to go free without any payment of money. In other words, if he has an affair or brings another woman in and does not take care of her and provide for her, what can she do? She can go back to her family. And they don't have to redeem her, don't have to pay anything, all right? So remember, God isn't addressing what's right and wrong per se. He's addressing the culture of the day and saying this is how it needs to be done, all right? So much of God's word in these laws was about creating responsibility and accountability. Where we live in today, where who has accountability and responsibility? Virtually no one. It's their fault. If someone else did it, they caused me to do this. You can see that God's in so many of these where he's dealing with you be responsible, or there's a consequence for your actions. Verse 12, any questions on that? I'm going to move on past that maybe. Anyone who strikes a person with a fatal blow is to be put to death. That sounds rough, doesn't it? But what is that? That's capital punishment. Why? I've told you last week. Why was it capital punishment? There were no jails. All right. And so this is talking about intent. This is if they did it intentionally. This is premeditated or, this is not manslaughter. This is not accident. This is with intent. That person was to be put to death. Why? Because you didn't want murderers out on the streets. What do we as a culture today not want people who go to jail and they get a few years and then they're back out? How do we feel about that? Right? You don't like it. Let's be real. We don't like it. We want to know they rehabbed. Well, how do you know they're rehabbed? Well, they didn't have anywhere to put them. So they were put to death. All right? However, if it was not done intentionally, but God let it happen, or it happened as accidents do, or manslaughter happens, they are to flee to a place he will designate. So there was a city of refuge for people who committed manslaughter. But they still, think about that for a second. If they took someone's life, even accidentally or unintentionally, they still lost a lot. A lot. And we have people that do it intentionally that don't lose a lot. So, but if anyone schemes or kills someone deliberately, that person is to be taken from my altar and put to death. What that means, there's no place of sacrifice. God's altar is no place of sacrifice. Verse 15, anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death. So, and this is not talking about kids, one translation says kills. Then, of course, that would apply anyway, right? If they kill their parents, it'd be the same as the rule before. But it circles back in a second. Verse 16 says, if anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. Anytime you have someone that tells you, and this is an argument that has been presented to me as an African American, and why I shouldn't believe the Bible is because they tell me that the Bible and God approves slavery in the way it was done, which I disagree with. God does not. Man does that. And when it's talking about slaves, masters, servants, you always have to understand what the original word was. Right here, it says, if anyone takes someone against their will, that's what kidnapping is. Someone, whether it's a child or an outsider, if you take someone against their will and you sell them, what's the consequence? Death. The entire slave trade was kidnapping, right? Taking somebody against their will. So unless God changed his mind, he made it pretty plain. What were we about to say, Van? Yeah. Battle. Yeah. But even think about the 70 years that Israel was in bondage was actually, they went, I know it was 490 years where they did not observe giving the land a Sabbath rest. God said, give the land, it's not just people, and we hadn't got to it yet, but the land was to get Sabbath rest every seventh year as well. Okay, so if you planted this land, the seventh year you were not to plant that land. Okay, so they went 490 years without that. Anybody want to tell me what 490 Sabbath? How many Sabbath years happens in 490 years? 70. 7 times 70. So God gave the land a what? Sabbath rest. So, and there's so many 490s. How many times are we to forgive someone? 7 times 70. And I'm not. I almost digressed into another teaching on Hebrew. Hebrew language is both alphabetical and numerical. The numbers have meanings. I mean, the letters have numerical meaning. So, but verse 17 says, anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death. Now, that's raising the bar, isn't it? Now, of course, that's not talking about the little single. I don't think it's talking about someone using profanity. Cursing in this text is a lot different than what we use when we say cuss words. It's a vicious act. It's a malicious act. It's not just words. No, it's not just words. It's actions. Yeah. Yep. All right, verse 18. If people quarrel and one person hits another with a stone or with their fist, and the victim does not die but is confined to bed, the one who struck the blow will not be held liable if the other can get up and walk around outside with a staff. So God even addresses fighting, right? I mean, if they're fighting, and I guess they used stones back then, hit someone with a stone or with their fist, or with a tool or anything else, and the victim does not die, but is confined to a bed, the one who struck the blow will not be held liable if the other can get up and walk with a cane or a staff, okay? However, the guilty party must pay the injured person for any loss of time and see that the victim is completely healed. Now, I paused there because at first it sounded like he did something and he wasn't. What we would have said, we would say that the paying him back and all that is being liable, right? So that tells you that when you got into a fight and hurt someone, it was serious business. If you injured them, but they weren't like bedridden or whatever, and they could get up in a couple of days, you still had to pay them for missing work or any lost income. Let that sink in for a second. I wish some of this stuff would come back, right? Hold people accountable. I mean, he's literally must pay the injured person for any loss of time and see that the victim is completely healed, all right? Oh, we'll see off the lawyers. They definitely got the marketing budgets. Verse 20 says, anyone who beats their male or female slave with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Uh-oh. Yes. Anyone who beats, that sounds bad, right? But once again, you have to break it down. First and foremost, God was not condoning beating slaves. What happened to the Israelites for 400 years? They were beaten, right? They were mistreated. And what do people tend to do when they come from a generation of a certain behavior? They repeat it, right? And remember, what were the majority of the people who were here? They were indentured servants, people who were either owed the person These were not slaves like somebody went out and bought someone. Why? Because the person who sold it would have been put to death, so that probably wouldn't last very long, right? I mean, if you sell somebody and you're dead, then somebody else has to pick up your business. So this was not slaves where they were buying all of these slaves. These were people who either were poor, indentured, thieves, or they are indentured servants who it came to them to work off their debt, and they would be free in how many years? 6 years work, 7th year go free. So he's addressing here, if he is, there were 0 rights. Before this, a slave was not considered human in other cultures. If you killed a slave, it meant nothing because they were not considered human. They were considered property, right? And so they were like, you own them and they are yours and you could do whatever you wanted to because they had no rights. He is giving them, he's giving rights here, and he's not saying beat them severely. He's saying if you do, there are consequences, okay? He's giving rules for the elders to judge and to rule by. But they're not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, since the slave is their property. Now, what does that mean? When you first hear that, you're like, I just thought they didn't own them. Well, what happens in 6 years? They go free, so they don't own them, right? They're not their property. The literal translation, as you study that out, is that was their means and their money. So why would you, in other words, the elders, this is all for the elders in the court system to get involved with. Why would you want, if it's a day or two, why would you bring the court into it? And that's what that's talking about, is if they recover, it's your money. Dude, if you're stupid enough to cost yourself money, then you're stupid. I mean, that's what this is what that's trying to teach there is, but if it's only 1 or 2 days, then the court is not going to get involved. But if it's severe, then they're going to get involved and the owner is going to be punished. That makes sense? All right? So, but God is not condoning beating the slaves or the servants. All right? Verse 22, if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there's no serious injury, the offender must be fined whatever the woman's husband's demand and the court allows. But if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Now, I'm not getting into abortion today, and this is not a direct abortion topic, but it is about the sanctity of life and human rights and when human rights begin. And any time we talk about this topic, and I don't think anybody has any question where I stand. I literally sit on the board of Save a Life Ministries, New Day Women's Center, which is a pregnancy center, and we are proactively in the fight. And I am proactively in the fight against abortion. So I don't beat around the bush with that. But verse 22 is teaching about human rights. And the big argument that a lot of times that stems behind the abortion argument is, when does life begin and when does the baby have rights? Because a lot of the argument has become abortion is a healthcare issue and versus a human rights issue. And so God isn't addressing abortion because abortion wasn't an issue during this time. But he is addressing when life is deemed to be equal to human life of those who are out breathing around. There's so many people who quote verse 23 out of context and quote it as a revenge verse. And if you do this to me, I'm going to get you back type of verse. And verse 23 says, but if there is serious injury, you are to take life for life, Eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. You do it to me, I'm going to do it back to you. That's the way many people quote that. But this scripture was directly related and given to when a pregnant woman was hit when two other people were fighting. Let that sink in for a second. God's saying the sanctity of life and human life and the rights of the unborn or the rights of those, and that's all of these. If you look at all of these, what is he doing in every one of these? He's protecting who? Those who can't protect themselves. From the top of this book all the way down, whether it's the slave, whether it's the wife, whether it's the daughter, whether it's the person that's injured, all of this is about protecting those who can't protect themselves. And so if you go back to that, it says if people are fighting and hit a pregnant woman and she gives birth prematurely, but there's no serious injury, there was still consequences. The offender must be fined whatever the woman husband demands and the court allows. If you hit a pregnant woman in this time and she gave birth and the baby was totally okay, nothing serious wrong, the husband still had rights on behalf of that baby to ask for you to be fined. Okay? And then and it says he could demand whatever he wanted. And if the court agrees, that's what the person who did it had to pay. But if there's serious injury, you're to take life for life. What did he just say that baby in the womb was with that one statement? Alive. He said it was a life. So anytime if you want, listen, it doesn't matter to me where you stand. I told you where I clearly stand. And I have had people say, well, they don't have a soul yet, and they don't have this. And I always tell people, anything that's living, if we don't interject, continues to live. Okay? So from the time a baby is conceived, that seed is living unless there's something medically, physically, or spiritually that causes it to stop living. Okay? Here, himself, he says, if you cause a pregnant woman to have a baby and she loses that baby and that life is lost, then you lose your life. That's what that says. A life for life. Well, watch this. If the baby loses his eye or tooth or bruise or wound, it didn't matter. He was saying that life inside. Now watch this. Do y'all understand that we have that same law? Even in a world, even in a country that millions upon millions of babies have been aborted. Do y'all know that we have that law? You know that if someone causes a pregnant woman to lose her baby, he can be charged with manslaughter? But yet the same people who say that that's okay are the same people that say that the baby isn't alive if the doctor does it. So, this is a passion issue for me. And I unapologetically, if you're listening and you're tuned in and you don't go to church here or you go to church here and you disagree with me on abortion, get rid of me. Because I will not compromise and I do not beat around the bush. It is murder. And there are people who have it has been forced on people. There are people who have chosen to do it. There are people who regret they've done it. And there's a whole gamut. There's people who just use it for birth control. I want us to walk in compassion. I want us to walk in love. I want us to walk in grace, but I want us to walk educated. I want us to be able to have the conversation. When I ran for mayor, man, you won't believe the conversations that I had. Well, when does the baby breathe? When it says that God breathed into Adam and then he became a living soul. I said that was the creation. And then from that point on, God gave it to man and woman to procreate. And then when you look at it from there, if we don't do anything to stop it, does the baby live? Unless there's something medically wrong. So like I said, I I apologize if I offend anyone. No, I don't. I'm sorry. If you're offended by my stance, I'm sorry. I don't apologize for that. I told you I serve on the board of Save a Life, New Day Women's Center, and I have done it for a while. And as long as they'll let me serve on the board, I'll keep serving until they tell me I have to leave. Unapologetically, it is one of the most horrific things that I think has ever happened in this world. And I always ask people, if your parents had a different view, would you be here? Now, does this address every issue? No. Are there some times where it is a medical decision? Very possible. Very possible. A mother's life could be at danger and the baby's life could be at danger, and you have to make a choice. That's a medical decision. Walking up and ending a pregnancy because it's an inconvenience is not. I don't have time to get into it. But almost all of the cases of pregnancies and different things like that are covered in the scriptures, and you don't see where God tells them to abort. So, eye for an eye. I mean, this is if it's done accidentally, and we still have that law today. If someone accidentally causes the death of a baby prematurely, then they can be charged with manslaughter. They can be charged, with the death of that baby. But yet, a doctor can do it and is considered health care. So, anyway, we'll pick back up. I'll review that again next week. If you have any questions, I have zero issues with having that conversation. I personally want to see it done away with it. And I know a lot of people think that it's changed because of Roe versus Wade. It's people just drive across borders, or people who pay, or people who come to Tuscaloosa and pay to transport people to other states. So there's a lot of money behind continuing that. So we'll fight it here. And if you don't fight with me, I guess you're fighting against me. But any questions or comments on that? All right, we'll keep it going. We'll pick back up next week in Exodus 21 verse 26 was where we'll start the new content, and we'll keep right on rolling. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of today's class. I pray that you have learned something new, been encouraged by it, challenged by it. And if you have any questions or comments, please do not hesitate to post them online or give me a call. Yeah, I'll be glad to talk. Thank you, Jesus. Bless today's service. Bless all the moms. I don't think it's coincidence that God had me hit that on Mother's Day, of all of the times to hit. But anyway, thank you, Jesus, for all that you do. In Jesus' name.